Welcome to the Renal Research Institute's Frontiers in Kidney Medicine and Biology, where we share knowledge and advances in kidney research with the world. In the United States, more than 90,000 people are currently waiting for a kidney donation. Yet, only 25,000 donor kidney transplants happen in this country each year. Unfortunately, about 12 people die on a daily basis waiting for a kidney donor. Living donation truly makes a huge difference. It cuts wait times, improves patient outcomes, and can double the life expectancy of a transplanted kidney compared to a deceased donor. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Maria Ferris, a pediatric nephrologist and an epidemiologist, and a professor of pediatrics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who, in addition to researching young adults with kidney disease and their healthcare transition, was a kidney donor herself to her then young son. We're also very fortunate to be joined by her son, Ted Ferris, who works as a National Director of Clinical Research for Mental and Behavioral Health Clinics and is a 3-time kidney transplant recipient. And we're also joined by Chris Ivimey, a field application specialist at Sativa, where he focuses on bioreactors and growing cells at a large scale to make them efficiently produce life-saving medicine. Chris is also an altruistic kidney donor. Together, we will discuss organ donation and the importance of living donor transplantation and the impact that it makes on their families and the generations beyond. Well, Maria, Ted, and Chris, of course, thank you all so very much for joining me here today. And I think you all have such unique personal stories from so many different angles. Obviously, Maria, you as a nephrologist, as a kidney donor, Chris, you as a not nephrologist, as a very altruistic kidney donor, and then of course Ted, you as a kidney recipient and a son of a nephrologist. I'd love to, maybe Maria, I'll kind of start off with you, and I want to make sure this is, of course, very casual as a conversation. How did your medical background, did it influence your decisions, your pathway with Ted, of course, in terms of your kidney donations and how you got into pediatric nephrology? I'd love to kind of hear your personal story about it.
Well, very quickly, I was finishing medical school when Teddy was diagnosed, and I already enjoyed nephrology. And in order for me to deal with the new diagnosis and the uncertainties, I just decided to learn more in the field, and I decided to do this fellowship in pediatric nephrology. That's the story. I've always liked it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, Chris, let me ask you a bit of a follow-up question here, because again, I think you are the one that probably doesn't, well, you do have a medical background, but maybe not as a physician per se. What's your, how much did you know about kidneys growing up? I
I
think everybody has a different perspective. I'd love to hear yours because I certainly know mine. Um, Tell me more.
yeah, there was nothing really too significant. Like I enjoyed biology, I majored in biochemistry, so I had kind of a background in anatomy and that kind of stuff. But kidneys were never really a huge focus. When I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who had kidney disease or too much associated with it. My mother is diabetic, so that's always like a risk with that condition, but or like a future risk with that condition. But there was nothing too major. It really wasn't until I kind of was inspired to get into this process that I really learned more. And now I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere nearly as qualified as Maria, but I'm kind of among my friend group the one that's most knowledgeable about kidneys these days, though. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure you are, and I will have some follow-up questions for you about that. So,
perfect. Yeah.
um, and then I think Ted, obviously, I think, it sounds like there were, I think even when you were born, and of course, I understand your first kidney transplant was at you were 16. So tell me more about kind of what you knew about kidneys, about kidney disease growing up. I mean, I think it must have been such a different perspective being so young and being so aware of kidney disease and what is kidney disease.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'd just like to say thank you to Chris for being an altruistic donor. I mean, I think obviously, as your intro explained, we need more of those, right? But so thank you, Chris, for doing what you did. Um, I was born with kidney disease, so for me, there is no life without it, right? It just is. It's my normal, and so both of my parents did a great job of raising me despite the many challenges of the disease to be just like everybody else and view life as this is my normal. And so kidney disease and being in the end stage, being on dialysis, transplant, all of that was just kind of baked in. I remember when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, I had a surgery procedure in the morning and then went to go play baseball that afternoon, right? So it was just life. It is what it was. And so I probably have a much different perspective in dealing with the disease than maybe someone who's diagnosed later in life or as an adult. That's, I think, a much bigger um, hurdle to jump because you've understood what life could be like as a healthy adult, and then now all of a sudden you're dealing with the challenges of the chronic disease that kidney disease presents.
Yeah. Ted, when you were younger, were you looking at pictures and books of anatomy of the kidney, the nephrons and all the tube of Henle and all that other stuff, or was that not of a lot of interest to you as a kid, I guess?
Well, to me, I don't know if this is a coping mechanism or not, but because it just was, I was always focused on what normal is in sports and playing sports and being good in school and all the normal kid stuff. So, despite growing up in a home with a world renowned nephrologist, I never focused on the kidneys. I never talked about the kidneys at home. It was not even like I said with my example of the surgery in the morning and baseball at the afternoon. I just went in for something, but I was really just focused on getting to the baseball game.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Ted, I'm going to ask you one more
I have to say
question.
something about
Yeah, of
that. Thank you
course.
for reminding me, Ted. But what he's not telling you is he went home with a urinary bag, a bladder, catheter, and everything, and he was sliding into home with that bag. So it was not just going to the surgery and then going to play. He went to play with a Foley catheter in place and a urinary bag collecting his urine. So it's an extraordinary time.
It really is. I mean, I think I have to, as and I know we spoke yesterday a little bit, Ted, but, for people who don't have this, I think it's such an incredible thing to listen to and to actually, I certainly try to relate to what you're telling me. One maybe quick question for you, and I think since Ted, I asked you a question. Tell me more about, obviously, one of the things that a lot of people will ask is, after the surgery and that you actually received I think your second transplant was the one that was actually successful. Can you tell me a little bit more about, how you felt? And I mean, I know there's a recovery time, and I think we all know there's a lot of medications, immunosuppressants, and other things that you have to take in the very beginning. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how your experience was, and to our audiences certainly would be
Oh,
very.
absolutely. I would equate it to the Wizard at the beginning of the Wizard of Oz, where it's in black and white, and then Dorothy wakes up after the tornado, and everything's in bright Technicolor. I mean, it was just like a switch was flipped, and the fatigue, the anemia, the hypertension, the just malaise of the disease was lifted and gone. And sure, I had all these medications. I was immunosuppressed. I had to be careful about what I did and where I went and wear a mask. But to me, all of that was like a drop in the bucket compared to I felt normal again, as opposed to feeling the disease and the weight of it every single day, all day long. And so it was just like a light switch turning on.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can only imagine. And I know I'm gonna, I can assure you I'll ask you a couple of questions about dialysis as well, because I think, as we all know, I think the kidney transplant truly is the gift of life. But I think you actually used the analogy of kind of some of this, especially home dialysis. It was very nice to hear from you yesterday about that. You also thought it was a gift of life in sort.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I'll ask you more questions about it, but I do want to turn it back to a little bit, Chris. I mean, obviously, as you know, when I first learned your story, I was fascinated because, as you know, I've been in this field for 25 years. I also, to me, it was just so fascinating to hear this, and such a wonderful thing. As you know, it does not happen that often, sadly, in this country, but it's a wonderful thing to hear. I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions about how you felt. Well, first, I'm going to ask you, obviously, what led to it. I mean, it sounds like you did a lot of research, and I think you had a friend. I don't know who the friend was, but I think it was I think it was your friend's dad, that I
Yep.
think that was what your specific donation was. So tell me more about initially kind of what led to your decision.
Yeah, certainly. So, I had a good friend from high school, and she and I have kept in touch ever since then. And we were talking one day, and she told me about how her dad's kidney was starting to fail, and he had to like go on a special diet for it. They were monitoring him closely. He was constantly going in and out of the hospital just for tests and for monitoring and such. And she told me that she was interested in potentially becoming a donor for him, or at least, like in the future, when his kidney did fully fail, becoming a donor and just at least trying to help him get a kidney sooner if she wasn't a perfect match. So this has been my friend for a number of years, and when I heard about this, I kind of thought that it's always better to go through something like this with someone else. So I pretty much told her, hey, I'd be interested in going in this with you, trying to become a donor as well, and just going through all the testing to see if I could be a match for your father, or if like at least be there with you when you were going through this whole process. So we started together. We would just text back and forth about the jokes about the different tests that we were going through, like if this isn't too more like peeing in a cup and like all the different kind of tests you had to go through to kind of like get approval and stuff going into the hospital, all these different trips in there. And then over time, her test results led the doctors to conclude that she would be high risk if she decided to follow through with the donation. And so she was advised to not continue. But for me, at least, I was able to get through the tests without any issues, or was at least the doctors were not concerned by my test results, and with my just medical history, they said that I would be a good contender for kidney donation in general. After that, I proceeded to go through with the testing. So I'd say I think I started in April of 2021, this whole process, and about 8 months of testing later, I finally obtained approval, and then in February of the following year, I was able to carry out my donation. So yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. So just maybe a couple of really quick follow-up questions. The first
Yeah.
one is, I realize, you have your surgery, you open your
Mhm.
eyes. Like, what do you remember feeling, within those first, few minutes, few hours, maybe a couple of days? I mean, since I
And
know you a little bit personally, I remember that I think, there was some, I remember you saying something about that you felt like there's, you felt okay, but you felt like there was something maybe missing, like physically actually missing in your body. So I'd love to hear this experience right after.
yeah,
Fairly
absolutely.
shortly
So right after, I remember my first thought when I woke up was actually thinking, well, that was easy. So like I just remember like waking up and being like, oh, that like this is the thing I've been thinking about for like a solid amount of time, and like the fact that like you go into the operating room, you go to sleep, and then you wake up and it's done. It's kind of like, oh wow, that was really wasn't so bad at all. I mean, obviously the anesthesia was still having an impact. Like the it was so I didn't like, quite feel everything in those first few minutes or hours. But I remember like thinking, oh, that was really chill. I called my parents immediately just because I knew the family like knew this was going on, and they were like a bit like not worried, but they just wanted to make sure that everything had gone smoothly. So it was great to talk to them afterwards. The first night afterwards, that was when I think it got a bit more achy. Like I don't think it was really the like incisions that were the real problem. Instead, and Maria, you'll probably know the details about this much more than I do, but as I understand, they kind of have to like inflate your inner cavity with CO2 in order to do the surgery and get more room. And having like all that like kind of bubbles and air in there, that was really kind of uncomfortable. But then besides that, things started to heal up. I was able to move more easily. It was certainly a like moving and using your core was definitely a struggle immediately afterwards. But I'd say overall, like the recovery was really straightforward. The one thing I will say that I did not expect was just how much you use your core when you laugh. Like I come from a family of very funny people, and like there's a lot of laughter in my household. And so when I was going to my parents' place, like for a week of recovery, I didn't. You realize just how much you laugh and how painful that is after the surgery. So that was one thing I didn't expect. But I mean, overall, I think that the recovery went really well for me. It was definitely some time off the gym, which the gym isn't like I go to the gym a lot, but it definitely was kind of I was like waiting to get fully back to 100% and like ready to get back to the gym, but I do think those like few months really just flew by.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Who knew laughing would be so hard?
No, exactly. And like it's also one of those things where like when you're just stuck in bed recovering, like so much of my entertainment at least is comedy based, but like I couldn't watch any of that because like I couldn't laugh or else I'd be like it was really really painful. So I had to like find other things. There were a lot of documentaries. I watched a lot of documentaries during the recovery. That was my kind of main focus. Lots of reading and documentaries. Yeah.
Wow, that's really incredible. Well, and I guess, since we're on the topic of how you feel or felt at the time, I recall, I think you said it was maybe a few weeks of kind of recovery when at that point you felt completely fine. And I mean, I assume now you feel 200% fine, but, just kind of like, when do you think you felt completely normal and back to your real self,
Back to
athletic
my full
self?
self. It's actually incredible. So the doctors told me like no going to the gym for 3 months, and I really was like almost day of at that 3 month mark was when like I was like, oh, I can turn without any kind of pain or tightness. I can open doors. Opening doors is amazing. That was like one of the hardest things for me. Like I don't know, when I open them I can't really pull into it, but like it that always kind of like had like a twing whenever I did that. But yeah, that 3 month mark was really when, oh, I'm kind of back. And like here and there you get kind of like some tightness and such and so on and so forth. But really that 3 month mark was like I think my before and after, like personally for me, yeah.
Wow. Well, again, I mean, it's an incredible story, and maybe Maria, I do have a little bit of a follow-up question, and I know we've chatted about this a little bit before, but I understand that, of course, Ted received the first kidney transplant was from you when he was about 16 years old, and I also understand that it was unsuccessful due to a surgical error. And maybe, I'd love to get your perspective personally, but also, I mean, we all know grafts don't always survive, and I think there is some probability that, hopefully not as often due to a technical error, which I think is what happened in your case. But can you just talk about it a little bit more medically, how often things like this may happen, and
Yeah.
and
It's
and
incredibly rare.
practice?
This complication is rare. So I want to encourage potential living donors to not think that that's going to happen. It's incredibly rare. And we had other avenues and options like dialysis. So it's not like it affected my son's life immediately in in that way. It's very frustrating, very sad, and I was the medical partner in the relationship with Ted's father, and so he's not going to be able to advocate, hey, let's do this, let's do that. So that was the frustrating and sad part, is that if I had not been the donor, it had been in somebody else, I would have been able to maybe perhaps make some changes. But we can't dwell on that.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, you talk about when did you know you were back and recovered. For me, it was 6 weeks. And I didn't have the experience you had. I had a different approach. They did not do the technique that you had, Chris. They went on the side and got the kidney out directly, so they didn't have to put that CO in my that air in my abdomen. For me, I knew I was back is when I was driving. I love to drive, and I drove. I was told not to drive for the first 4 to 6 weeks. Well, by about week 5, I got in my car. I was gone. I knew I was back. The other thing that potential donors need to think about, particularly women in childbearing age, is can you have another child or another pregnancy? And I'm going to tell you that I had 2 children after my donation. It's possible to be a parent after donation. So, and I'm completely healthy. It's been a number of decades that happened. I watch my salt, watch my diet. I take no medications, and I'm a healthy donor at this age. So just be a good citizen to your body, and you'll recover well long term.
Well, Maria, that's obviously a wonderful story. I know you brought up a couple of things. I think the first one is talking about children. Ted, I know you have 2 beautiful daughters. I do want to see their pictures at some point. But I know you have a 5 and a 6-year-old daughter, and I think, Ted, maybe I'll ask you a question, since also Maria also brought up dialysis a little bit, and I know you you actually talked about it a little bit with me yesterday. So can you talk about this a little bit? There's in-center dialysis, home dialysis. I think you brought it up yesterday, so I thought maybe I'll ask you some questions about it because obviously it is to me, the ultimate gift of life, of course, is a transplant. But you did say something interesting to me about dialysis, which was nice to hear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a teenager, I just had hemodialysis in center, and the interesting thing about that part was I was a very shy child, and that period of that year of being on dialysis in the center, um, I made so many friends, the nurses, fellow patients, and so I try to take good away from everything, right? So despite the process and time-consuming process, of course, being a high schooler, I was like, 3 days a week, I get out of school 2 hours early,
Yeah.
um, instead of how difficult dialysis is and how really exhausting you feel after hemodialysis. And so later in life, after my second transplant, in between second and third, I briefly was on hemodialysis in center, and then transitioned home. And that in and of itself was also like a Dorothy's and Oz moment, because in center dialysis, hemodialysis, it is an exhausting process. It's a day and a half of recovery. You get maybe 6 to 10 hours of, oh, I feel pretty good, and then the disease takes over and you got to go back in, right? And so um, hemodialysis is an exhausting experience, and especially as an adult, limits your ability to have a fully fledged career and all those things. And so when I transitioned to home dialysis, it was almost like a whole new world all over again, because um, home dialysis allowed me to live a full life. I dialyzed at night. Um, I had more energy because I was dialyzing every night. I mean, there was a time when I was on dialysis where um, we took a trip to Disney World. I was fortunate to do that, and 3 straight days walking 5, 6, 7 miles a day, and no big deal because I was dialyzing every night, right? And so home dialysis in and of itself was also a gift that I experienced transitioning off of hemodialysis.
Yeah.
And then again, I was on PD at home for almost a year. And when my cousin Lulu donated her kidney, and I woke up from that surgery again, it was like, oh, right, this is what a colorful world looks like again. Um, because I'd adjusted to the home dialysis
Yeah.
normal. Um, and just to reiterate what my mom said, my two children, who were, just the light of my life. I've got two girls. I'm a proud girl dad. Neither one of them would be born without my cousin Lulu having donated her kidney to me. And she herself is now pregnant with her first child. And so it's just an amazing, life affirming gift that doesn't limit you from living a normal, healthy life after giving that gift. So, Chris, you've shared your story, and just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Ted, obviously you said so many things that I wanted to mention. You said something very interesting that I certainly think about, and I think many of us as we age, um, you wake up one day and you're like, if you could only feel how you used to feel 20 or 30 years ago, and that's kind of, I
Right.
think that's what you made me think of when you mentioned, oh, I remember how I felt, when you woke up with with an actual graft or an actual kidney transplant. While you may be living on dialysis, I think certainly the feeling that you may get with a kidney transplant is actually quite different. So that's pretty incredible to hear. Um, I think, Chris, I want to ask you a question, and I think maybe it's for both you and also a little bit for Maria. I do think it is so important that I think the living donation is obviously so critical, and there's a lot of rumors and a lot of things relating to, how does that affect people's lives, and all the stuff that I think may exist out there, and fears and things like this. And of course, when you actually look at the facts and the data, is that most of the, I think it's just not true. I think people can live with one kidney. So I think, Chris, I'm assuming you did some research back in the day. I'm sure maybe that was a question for you. So maybe I'll ask you a question first about kind of what you were researching and kind of what you learned when you were looking at at the literature and the various websites that I think exist out there, and then Maria, and then I'm going to ask you more formally about a medical perspective on this, because I do think it's important for audiences to know, because I do think there's initially the gut reaction of most people. If you say, oh, I'm going to give up one of my kidneys, there's this sense of fear, like, what do you mean? You have two, so you should have two. But I think, I think we all know that actually physiologically, it's not that it's two for a reason. It's two because of how cells split in the in the during the birth process. So maybe Chris, I'll ask you first that question. So
Yeah, so I did some research when I was first considering, when I was first seriously considering donating the kidney, I did some research, looked at a number of papers just on like kind of lifespans and just quality of life. For me, as like a younger man, when I donated, like there are things like contact sports, and for me personally, rock climbing, which is a bit of a concern when you donate a kidney, just because the way the harness or some harnesses are positioned, if you have a bad fall, it can lead to damage in the area. I just did research on like what preventative measures you can do. I did research on like how likely injuries to the kidney are in those sports, and just from what I found, the people that donated, there was not a major difference in lifespans. People who climbed, I found forums of climbers with one kidney, and there are guards you can wear, and but for the most part, no one ever claimed that it was really an issue for them. The biggest other thing for me was that I run a lot. I'm a pretty active person, and staying hydrated and like concerns about things like rhabdo, if I were to ever go for a very intense hike, were there. But I mean, in a lot of ways, it almost made me just more conscious about staying hydrated and like preparing more for when I do those big events, really than like deterring me from doing them. I think honestly the donation just made me much better at planning things out when I do go for something that would be just more risky in terms of like keeping my kidney healthy. It made me better about staying hydrated, better about planning, and I think ultimately it made me take care of my body a lot more, which I think was a sum total a benefit. So yeah, that was my experience. It's not limiting me in anything. It's really just made me better at taking care of my body in general. Yeah.
yeah, that's a wonderful perspective. I mean, I think I think I never thought of it that way actually, Chris. But I think now that you say this, I think it makes a lot of sense. And Maria, I guess as a physician in the room, I'll ask you a question. I think I mean, obviously medically, we all know that there isn't it does not really affect people, but maybe I'll just ask your perspective on this. If a living donor wants to give their kidney, what just like you did or just like Chris did, I think, what is your perspective on this in terms of their life going forward?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge Chris's donation, which is really an amazing gift. A number of us have given to our family members, but you did not. But I want you to know that the impact in the patient and that patient's family and friends is unmeasurable. So thank you for your wonderful gift.
Thank you, Maria.
From the medical standpoint, when you prepare potential donors, in my case, we prepare parents or grandparents who want to donate, or aunts and uncles. We approach them, the education, from all the standpoints. Can I work? Can I have children? Can I have a social life after donation? What's going to happen to me after donation? How long will I live? Will it affect my longevity? And those questions are answered easily with data. So people have almost normal lifespans. And those who pass the expected lifespan do very well, precisely because they're donors like kidney and other donors that become good citizens to their bodies. They don't go and do risky behaviors, or they don't go and take medicines without justification because they're taking care of their one kidney. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing I wanted to mention is there are human beings that never know that they have one kidney, that die having one kidney, and it's found in autopsy or it's found incidentally. They go in for a procedure and they do a study, and oh, by the way, you have one kidney, and you've never known it, right? The kidneys are the most wonderful organs in the body. I think they're the best organs in the body. I'm sorry to be nephrocentric.
A little biased, but that's okay.
The heart is just a pump, right? And the brain don't do very much without the kidneys working well. But the reality is, you can have a decent life until about 20% kidney function, and you need a kidney or dialysis at about 10% of kidney function. So that's how noble the kidneys are. But kidney patients, while they have a condition that is chronic, that there's no cure for it, I want everybody to think about how wonderful it is to have dialysis or to have a donor, because, you know, kidneys donations have been about 50, 75 years old, but dialysis has been a lot longer, and it's been prolonging people's lives. Unlike liver disease, for example, or heart disease, you don't have the extra help that dialysis gives you. So I think that there is hope. I think that in commemorating World Kidney Day, it's important for us to think about our family members. Or if you have a friend that has kidney disease, suggest to the whole family to check their blood pressure, suggest to everybody to be checking their blood pressure and their kidney function. Hey docs, how are my kidneys? When you go to see the doctor, ask the doctor, hey, how is my kidney function? And that's how you can start propagating this message that World Kidney Day has for us, is let's take care of those kidneys. They're wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I agree 100%, and I do want to remind everybody that March 13th is World Kidney Day, which is actually one of the reasons we're trying to do this episode, because we really want to remind everybody about living donations, which are obviously so important. Maria, you brought up something else that I think is important for the audiences to know. I realize, of course, most clinicians know this, but actually the general public does not necessarily know this. So when Chris, which again, thank you, Chris, for what you have done. The way it worked with you is you actually set off a chain of kidney transplants, and then what essentially happens in many of these situations. So your friend's father, you were not necessarily a match, but what actually happens is you set off a kidney chain. That means that other people in the chain based on their matches, are actually able to get a transplant. So it's really the most incredible and remarkable thing that happens with these truly altruistic, not a family member, like donations. So again, Chris, thank you. Um, Ted, maybe I'll ask you a question. I know we have maybe a couple more minutes, and I think one of the questions I do want to ask you is, of course, I know this is now, well, it's your third, I guess, kidney, and how do you think about the future? And I know I believe you're in your 40s, and tell me a little bit more about what you think, and how do you kind of prepare for unknown. We had a short conversation about this yesterday, but I'd love to hear from you now about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I accept the fact that this kidney that I have, thanks to my cousin, it's just 10 years old. We celebrated together. We went on a cruise together to celebrate 10 years. And it's not going to last forever. So I'm fully cognizant and hope I live to, 75, 80, 85, etc. Right? And so I can do math. So at some point I'm going to need another kidney. And so it's just a fact of life. And I'm encouraged that technology is improving. I mean, transplant medications are improving. Dialysis technology is improving. There's innovations in the world of transplant. And so all these things that seem sci-fi, when I had my very first transplant back in 1996, those things are happening. And so I just accept that at some point I'm probably going to have to go on peritoneal dialysis again, because that's going to be my choice. I want to dialyze at home. It's only one step below a transplant. I can still live a normal life with the ESRD with home dialysis. So I've just baked that into, it's not an if but a when, and live life to the fullest every day that I can with the gift of the kidney that I have. And when the day comes, the day comes.
Yeah, that's really, it's really incredible. And, Chris, I know you, a few days ago, you asked me about a social media post because it was a 3-year anniversary of your donation. I'm just going to ask you a quick question. Did you get any responses? What do your friends think about this? I know we have a couple of friends in common. What do people usually tell you? I actually don't, I don't actually know. I'd love to kind of hear, what do people say? I'm
Um,
interested.
generally they think it's incredible when you tell them about the fact that you donate. They say that that's awesome, and they say that that's something that very very nice that you do. And I mean, I appreciate it, but I would also love for them to say like that. I hope that my story can encourage more people to do it personally. That's really like what I intended with that Instagram post that I made about it. I really hope that like people can see that I'm able to live my life to the fullest, that donating has not stopped me or limited my life in any way, and I hope that it does encourage other people to consider donation if they're eligible, or to at least get themselves tested and consider it strongly that they could do the same and not worry that it would limit their life in any way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I can assure you, actually, I mean, obviously, me being in this field for so long, I've thought about this subject actually quite a lot myself personally. I can also tell you that yesterday, as I was preparing for this, or over the last couple of days, I did have some conversations at home as I was like, maybe it's time, you know. So I do think I can assure you that I think you may make a difference, and whether me or other people watching this, I do think it's an incredible thing to do, and I think it's extraordinarily important. So I think on that, I know we're almost at time or at time. I mean, any concluding thoughts from Ted, Maria, Chris, anything before we conclude for the day? And obviously, I want to thank you all from different angles and perspective. I want to thank you for your time. But any kind of finishing thoughts, Maria? Maybe
I
I'll
would love
start.
to
Oh,
share
go ahead,
something.
Ted. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've kind of hinted at this the whole interview, but the only reason I have children is because of a kidney donor. The only reason I have a career and a successful career is because of my family kidney donors. And so it's not just the person you're donating to that you're saving, but you're saving countless other lives and future generations for that person by one gift. And so thank you, Chris, for giving that gift to, your friends. And I sincerely hope that others watch this and learn that it's not this scary thing that you can live a normal life after donating a kidney. And as a person who's on dialysis, there's hope. There's revolutions coming for you to help you get your kidney or better dialysis treatments and living a normal life. All these things are happening, and it's the future.
Yeah. Well, Ted, thank you. Maria, anything you'd like to say?
Well, as a health provider, I have had the honor of serving patients with kidney disease, pediatric adolescents and young adults. And it is an honor to serve those patients. To me, they are my heroes. They don't need a cape. They are amazing individuals who are resilient, who go to the dialysis unit every time, continuing to live life to their fullest. And I want to say thank you for organizing this particular event in honor of World Kidney Day, because to me, kidney patients rock.
Maria, thank you. I mean, obviously, as you know, I know you for many, many years, and I've been very fortunate. I can tell everybody in the audience that Maria is truly one of the most passionate and wonderful physicians, pediatric physicians that I know. So I thank you, Maria. And then,
Thank
Chris,
you.
anything you want to, in conclusion,
Uh,
that you need to share?
Sure. I think my biggest kind of concluding thoughts as far as my donation and this conversation go is that it's honestly it wasn't a huge sacrifice for me to donate my kidney. It didn't have a huge impact on my life, and I think it's people like you, Maria, you, Len, and you, Ted, that are really putting in the work to help make the world a better place with respect to kidney donations and kidney diseases in general. And you guys are just inspiring me to get more involved and to put in more work so that I can also help more people out. So it's been lovely talking to you, and this was a really cool experience.
Yeah, no, Chris, obviously, again, thank you very, very much. Just, obviously, in conclusion, I do want to say, I think, and this is meant to be education and outreach in a way. So I do think I really want to thank you all for your time. And obviously, as I think I mentioned to you before, I think this will be available for public viewing and everything. And again, I do want to acknowledge that March 13th is World Kidney Day, which is recognized, I mean, globally. So it's a pretty, it's a very, very timely discussion. So I really want to thank you all for your time in every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your insight into kidney transplantation and the personal, meaningful impact that it makes on real people's lives. Thank you to our listeners for joining the Renal Research Institute for this episode of Frontiers in Kidney Medicine and Biology. We invite you to connect with us on our social media channels and stay tuned for future episodes as we continue sharing insights and advancements in kidney research.